The summer of 1944 unfolded over Europe like a tapestry of gunpowder and uncertainty. But behind the smoke of the battles, the real war was being fought in the factories, the engineering offices, and supply chains. While the German forces demonstrated impressive tactical capability and the sheer ingenuity of their panzers, there was an invisible fragility, a slow, systemic erosion in their logistical structure that the fiercest counteroffensive could not remedy. The German regime placed its faith in complex and expensive machines, a philosophy that, ironically, would become its Achilles heel in a conflict that demanded, above all else, adaptability and sheer volume. It was at some point between the invasion of Normandy and the push toward the heart of France that this difference in philosophy materialized in a single object of olive-drab steel. Historians often focus on the great tanks and the new jet aircraft, but the true story, at times, resides in the most humble of vehicles. In that confusion of retreat and advance, a Wehrmacht reconnaissance patrol captured, intact and operational, a vehicle that would become an obsession for the High Command, the American Willis MB Jeep. For the Allied soldier, it was merely a tool. For the German regime, it became a mirror reflecting its deepest flaws. The initial inspection of that small utility vehicle revealed a stark contrast. German forces used the Kübelwagen, a robust and functional vehicle, but one that required specialized components and meticulous maintenance. The Jeep, on the other hand, was a masterpiece of Spartan simplicity and mass engineering. It was neither elegant nor particularly innovative, but was easy to drive, incredibly resilient to abuse, and, crucially, designed to be manufactured in numbers that exceeded the imagination of European industry, already strangled by bombing raids and material shortages. The war at that stage was a contest of logistics. The Allies could replace a damaged Jeep with the same speed that Germany often took to repair an engine of a Kübelwagen or a heavy motorcycle. It was a victory of industrial simplicity over craftsmanship complexity. The German leader, obsessed with weapons of astounding technology, the miracles he hoped would turn the tide, neglected the trivial: rapid transport, efficient communication, and the ability to keep troops supplied at a relentless pace. The news of the capture and the subsequent technical analysis of the vehicle spread through German design offices and headquarters with a mixture of admiration and deep frustration. It was not a matter of being unable to copy the Jeep. It was a matter of being unable to copy it at that scale, with that economy of resources, and in that time. The German production structure, oriented towards superlative quality and over-engineering, could not recalibrate itself with a philosophy of rapid, efficient mass production that underpinned the American war effort. This simple machine revealed a technological chasm far greater than any supertank could mask. In that moment in 1944, the war was no longer about who had the best rifle, but about who could deliver more ammunition and canned beans to the front line faster and cheaper. The German soldiers' loyalty was tested not only by courage, but by the growing absence of fuel, spare parts, and the sleep that the complexity of their own logistics stole from them. The efficiency of the Jeep was a silence that screamed the truth about the impending collapse. The focus shifted from the battlefields to the laboratories. German engineers were ordered to dismantle the Jeep and try to integrate its concepts of durability, standardization, and ease of maintenance into their own designs. The moral dilemma settled in the hearts of these men of science. Whom did their ingenuity serve? They were called upon to sustain a war that, from the inside, seemed increasingly untenable. Between obedience and perception of inevitability, many continued to work, driven by the hope that some innovation would save their compatriots from disaster. The Jeep, as a symbol, forced the regime to confront the difference between what they thought they could do and what the enemy was actually doing. It was a materialization of the American concept of total war, where the entire industrial capacity of the nation was mobilized and simplified for the war effort. The Allied vehicle was robust because its assembly was simple. It was ubiquitous because its cost was low. It represented a brutal lesson that the excellence of few could not overcome the sufficiency of many. In a field report, a German engineer, assigned to analyze the captured Jeep, recorded a dry observation that nonetheless carried the weight of great truth. The simplicity of the axle, the standardization of the nuts, and the interchangeability of the springs attest to an industrial philosophy that escapes us. It is a vehicle built to be thrown away and replaced, not to be preserved and fixed. We continue to build precision clocks, while the enemy build hammers. This is the moment when genius realizes the superiority of utility. German complexity required time, training, and specific parts, luxuries the war no longer granted. Engineering, which was supposed to be Germany's salvation, became its chain. On another front, an Allied infantry soldier, who had just landed in France, recorded a very different view of the same vehicle in his diary. "The Jeep follows us like a loyal dog. We are not afraid to get it stuck or to crash it. When it breaks, we toss the pieces back in the box and move on with another one. It is a machine that allows us to forget about logistics and focus only on what is ahead of us. The next village, the next hill. It is the promise that we will make it home on time." The soldier's faith in the simple machine is not about technology. It is about trust. The certainty that the system supports him, that the supply will come, is the psychological oxygen that sustains the advance. It is the moral foundation of an offensive. The regime's logistics officer, confronted with growing shortages and the need to imitate the enemy's simplicity, drafted an internal memo that revealed the panic of the German bureaucracy. Orders have been issued to simplify the production of various truck models into a single utility vehicle, but resistance from sectors of the industry is fruitless. It is easier to move mountains than to change the mindset of our engineers, who consider such simplification an insult to their craft. The Führer demands high-horsepower engines, while our troops starve 200 kilometers from a nearest railway. The war machine is stopping from the inside. The war was being lost on railway tracks and muddy roads, not just on the battlefields. The pride of over-engineering suffocated the need for practicality. It was a moral dilemma of self-sufficiency. When loyalty to the method becomes a prison, what remains of adaptability? The lesson imposed by the small vehicle was not confined to design offices. It infiltrated the morale of the German troops. The soldier, seeing the ease with which Allied forces maneuvered, supplied, and mobile, began to measure the distance to defeat not in kilometers, but in pounds of equipment he had to drag on foot. The Allied advance, driven by tens of thousands of jeeps and trucks, was relentless not due to brute force, but due to logistical persistence. Time, the scarcest resource in war, was spent by the Germans on maintaining overly complex machines, while the Allies invested it in constant advancement. The Jeep, then, transcended its function as transport. It became a symbol of industrial optimism and strategic adaptability. It represented the American capacity to learn quickly, simplify the process, and scale production to an unprecedented level. For the German forces, it was a constant reminder that their struggle was against an economic and military machine operating on a fundamentally different scale. Tactical superiority on the battlefield could be neutralized by numerical superiority in logistics. There's a kind of hopelessness that is born not from defeat in combat, but from the realization that the adversary possesses resources you will never have. It is the moment when courage is confronted with mathematical inevitability. That Jeep alone was irrefutable evidence that Germany, despite all its technical genius, had lost a war production. This discrepancy reached its peak during the Battle of the Bulge in the harsh winter of late 1944. In what would be the last major German offensive in the West, the scarcity of fuel became the greatest weakness. Heavy, powerful, and fearsome combat vehicles often stalled due to lack of gasoline, becoming expensive, static targets. The bold plan failed not only due to Allied resistance, but due to the absolute inability of the German system to supply the speed the offensive demanded. Allied jeeps and trucks, on the other hand, were supplied by what became the endless supply line, the hastily constructed logistical pipeline, and the famous Red Ball Express, the tireless truck network that moved with the cadence of an industrial conveyor belt. The difference between an army that moves with horse-drawn carts and one that moves with tens of thousands of simple utility vehicles is the difference between the Middle Ages and industrial modernity. The Jeep was the personification of that modernity. Amidst the chaos of the offensive, when German supply lines were stretched to the limit and troops marched exhausted by the cold and lack of provisions, another fragment of humanity from that time emerges. We saw the German vehicles stopped, some covered in snow, the soldiers looking more tired than defeated. Then we heard the distinct sound of the American engine. They were small, fast, and there seemed to be an infinite supply of them. They did not stop. For us, it was not just a sound of liberation. It was a sound of a machine that worked tirelessly while the others stopped. External perception, the view of the civilian, often cuts through the military rhetoric. What they saw was not tactics, but sustainability. The German machine, which boasted of its precision, broke under pressure, while the Allied machine, of simple design, kept going. It was a battle of endurance, where simplicity overcame exhaustion. The definitive turning point was not a surrender, but a logistical decision. Throughout 1944 and 1945, the German High Command desperately tried to simplify their own designs, creating rudimentary and cheaper versions of vehicles. However, these efforts were always reactive and too late. The German engineering DNA, focused on high quality and low production volumes, could not be rewritten under bombing and shortages. The Jeep, designed to last just long enough and be replaced, was the antithesis of the German mentality of building for eternity. The human and moral costs of this technological rigidity were immense. The German infantry soldier, the backbone of any army, frequently suffered from a lack of mobility and supplies. Many of their moral dilemmas stem from knowing that even if they won a battle, their position was unsustainable. The strategic climax, therefore, is established at the moment when Germany finally recognizes, in its own reports, the impossibility of matching the enemy's supply volume. The ability to move troops and material was the new battlefield. While Germany was still focused on defeating the enemy in isolated combat, the enemy was outdoing on a global scale, using transport as a strategic weapon. The lasting lesson was not about firepower, but about the power of delivery. The Jeep demonstrated that, in modern warfare, volume trumps excellence. The military consequences were clear. The Allied logistical superiority allowed for rapid penetration into Europe, the maintenance of the winter offensives, and ultimately, the collapse of the German regime. The contrast between the arrogance of power and the humility of the simple tool is one of the deepest legacies of this episode. The obsession with Wunderwaffen, the miracle weapons, blinded the German regime to the need for basic infrastructure and supplies. History teaches us that victory often belongs not to the most brilliant, but to the most practical. The simplicity of the Jeep's design was, in itself, an act of war, a weapon of mass production that dismantled the industrial complexity of the Third Reich. The war ended, the great tanks rusted, and the planes fell silent. But the Jeep continued, for decades, serving around the world on farms, patrols, and expeditions. Its longevity is a testament to the philosophy that created it: utility, durability, and unpretentiousness. The engines fell silent, but the echo of that technological and philosophical difference still resonates in human memory. The small four-wheel drive vehicle is a solemn reminder that the power of a nation in conflict resides not only in the cleverness of its most sophisticated designs, but in the wisdom of its simplest ones. Those terrible years taught us that loyalty, courage, and obedience are powerful virtues, but that when deprived of a sustainable logistical and moral foundation, they fade. True courage, sometimes, is the capacity of the system to adapt, to simplify, and to sustain life rather than merely seek victory. The snow erased the tire tracks of the Jeep, but not the way the decisions made in the German offices, where the envy for a simple machine revealed a fatal fissure. And that echo of choices, the choice for complexity instead of simplicity, for pride instead of practicality, is the one thing history never allows us to forget. It is a subtle but profound defeat that materialized in four wheels and a four-cylinder engine.